Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, December 14th, and this is the joint work session of the Story County Board of Supervisors and the Story County Housing Trust Fund Board of Directors. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Is there a motion? I'd like to call the Board of Supervisors meeting to order. And approve the agenda. You need to make a motion by the supervisor to approve today's agenda.
Just formality, yeah.
Okay.
That might be easiest.
Okay, is there a motion by the Board of Supervisors to approve today's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Then moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, thanks, I turn it over to Brenda Dreyer.
Good afternoon, all. Brenda Dreyer. Amber is at her office in Eames, may need to be called away for other matters. So she asked me to sit in the chair position today. So again, I'll call the meeting of the Story County Housing Trust Fund Board of Directors to order. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Steve Ringley moves to approve.
Ringley,
I'll second.
Hope is joining us here in Nevada, so she seconds. Motion by Ringley, second by Matheny. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. So moving along in the agenda, I will kind of set the stage on what has brought us here today. Attached to the agenda, if you've not already seen, is a draft of the Housing Action Plan. And in 2020, and I don't know exactly for sure when, the housing study, I think probably was even back in 19, the Story County Board of Supervisors initiated a housing study. And through that process, data was collected from folks electronically through meetings, and a housing study was then rolled out earlier this year. And one of the things is there were some recommendations as a result of that study, but really challenging the staff at the county and encouraging a couple others of us to look at developing a more formalized plan to put that study to work. And so Leanne has really taken the lead in developing the Housing Action Plan. There's been a number of folks from a county staff standpoint. Andrew and I have had a chance to provide feedback to the plan as well. And really that's what we're here to do today is as the countywide housing agency really focused on, our work is focused on Story County. It would seem as if we should have a key role in the actions of our organization should be very consistent with the things that has been identified as some of the highest priorities for housing. So with that, again, I would stress this is really at this point in time a draft. The supervisors have seen it, but have not taken any formal action on it. So this is really about discussion and getting to a point where we all feel like this is something we can move forward on together. So that's our comments. Any others that want to make comments?
I do. This is Loris.
Loris?
So I pointed out already, but it was actually, I think, in a discussion related to maybe, I can't remember, ARP or whatever, but it needs to really be noted that this was never bounced off of the Housing Trust Fund Board of Directors, that Brenda and Andrew took it upon themselves apparently to engage and get this far in the process. Brenda is certainly an individual who, reports to an employer and has to justify her time that way. Andrew, I am very curious about how much time you actually put into it to get down to this point. And now your board of directors is only being consulted.
So I have reviewed it. I have not spent a significant amount of time. I don't believe I provided much feedback on it. I probably saw it a little bit before you all did officially. But there has not been a ton of action taken on my end on this. I think this has just gotten to a point where there's finally things that have been put on paper, and now we're all reviewing it, and now to provide comment on it and have thoughtful discussion on what any potential things that the Story County Housing Trust has a role in, and how that would look like and what that would
So
look like.
my concern, I appreciate that, and here's my second overall concern, okay, is we are behind on in some of our internal goals as it is, and this is a completely ambitious, I mean, I like it, sure, but to have gone this far in the process without the rest of the board having been able to have a private discussion, or at least, you know, just among us, about the feasibility of some of what's in here. And I just looked at the first 2 years. I figured that's really years 1 through 3 are that anything we really need to worry about right now. I'm very, very concerned about
And
this.
I guess I will
guess
interject.
we're accountable.
Yeah. And what I would interject in is that this is really a discussion item. We've talked about it with the supervisors. Again, this does the trust fund need to participate, Loris? This is a suggestion, it's a draft document. And certainly if after the discussion and they say as a volunteer board, we don't want to be involved, I think everybody will respect that. And again, it really is, it would seem as if we should have some involvement, but I'll leave the comments at that. And again, I guess my thoughts is that this is a draft document, and this isn't the first time it's been talked about publicly. So there have been other opportunities for it to be talked about publicly.
This particular document?
Madam Chair, can I share mine? Loris, this is Latifa.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, this is something that Leanne and I were working on because of the housing study
Yeah.
that the county did. And I know that the other supervisors have had other conversations with Leanne, trying to figure out how we can synthesize all of the information that's in the study, because what we got out of the study, it did not feel like we had tangible, actionable steps. And so working on that here on the county side, it kept coming up that it just made sense for us to be reaching out to other organizations that do this work. And Brenda was generous and shared her time to help put some thoughts together. And the whole reason we're having this joint meeting now is to present that to the Housing Trust Board for conversation, not making next steps on anything. We're just trying to make sure we're keeping things moving forward, and it just made sense to pull the Housing Trust in on that conversation, because as we're building the plan, we're seeing all these opportunities for collaboration, and that's the only reason.
So my question then to you, Latifa, is that there are other organizations named in this document, okay? Have they also has this gone to their boards? I mean, I'm just concerned about how formalized this looks. I understand it's just a draft, and I think it's great that there's follow-up on the housing study. Obviously, I'm for that. I'm concerned about this process and who else, you know, I guess they'll have to speak up whether they're concerned about being named, but I really feel like the trust board was not kept informed. So saying there's other public discussion, if there's an expectation that the Housing Trust Board is going to run around and chase after the board of directors and watch all these meetings and whatever, and that's the arena in which it was discussed, I'm concerned. I just want to point this out. I know we need to move on. Time is precious to all of us. I know the supervisors have had a busy day today and still have it more to come. I just really wanted to express that. Anybody of you who've worked with me and know me, that, you know, the transparency is so important, and that people who are listed in documents should actually be consenting to be in those. So thank you.
Thanks, Loris, for your comments. So, okay, that's what I was gonna say.
If I sit here and yell really loud, can those on Zoom hear me okay?
Can you hear Leanne?
I can.
Okay.
I have a presentation I'm going to share. And then at the end, I'd be glad to address any questions. Some of this has already been discussed. And keep myself in mind, this is our order for the draft for the agenda today. The item I'm on is really the overview of the draft housing action plan. And then I'll go forward and talk about potential next steps. Brenda talked about this when she gave her opening comments. It really, the housing study was adopted or accepted by the board this spring. It was prepared by RDG. If you look, you can't, I'm not gonna ask you to look at the details, but on the upper left-hand side of the screen, that really is the implementation schedule that was in the assessment. It lacked enough detail really to figure out where we needed to go forward. We had a blueprint, but now we really need to figure out the structure to continue building. So it led to really talking of what that looked like to successfully implement strategies that would effectively, positively affect housing and the situation throughout Story County. I do want to note though, when I say throughout Story County, it's a little bit of there's a donut hole with the city of Ames. They have been finishing up the Ames 2040 plan. They were purposefully left out of the housing assessment because of the timing of that. So when I say throughout Ames, or throughout Story County, is everything excluding the city of Ames, which I will kind of circle back around to that. That's really kind of what drove this image to start to identify all those entities that could, and this is not all those entities, but those entities that could possibly have a role in how Story County could march forward with this assessment. Since this was last seen at the work session like a month ago, the two yellow bubbles have been added because really our human service providers and our employers are integral to any strategies that are undertaken. And in some cases, they're actually mentioned as key players in the draft implementation plan. There are 56 tools in this plan. It is based around the 6 goals of the housing assessment. And then within each of the 6 goals are specific strategies. So this image just simply shows you how that breaks down by goals and strategies. But where are we now? As we talk over the next few minutes, I ask everyone to keep in mind these questions. There's, as I just said, 56 tools. Is this overly ambitious? Is that too many tools? Do we keep all the tools? Are there tools missing? Maybe it's not ambitious enough. Maybe there are some huge gaps that need to be identified. Do tools need revised language? And I will talk about some of the revisions that have been made since the last work session, the board of supervisors on this draft implementation matrix. And then also discuss the time frames. Are they appropriate for the tools? And then if there's time, priorities for Story County. And I'll touch on that here on the next slide and why that is important. So some of the modifications that are reflected in the draft that is on the agenda today. The plan assumptions were added to, but they were essentially language that was in other places of the implementation matrix that it made more sense based on our conversation at that last work session and put them into the assumptions. So I'm not going to go over page by page at this time. I'm going to just give you a snapshot of the changes. The framework for successful implementation, as I just said, was updated and included employers and human services providers. Much thanks to Amelia and her staff who relates to column has been added. And that has since been populated and is on the agenda. When we posted this last week, that was not yet completed, but basically what that takes, that's a snapshot of the tools and how they relate to each other. And really helps us think more intuitively than on how the overall impact may or may not be. Positions specific to Story County have been noted. Previous drafts have just simply said county staff. We were asked to kind of drill down and start identifying what that meant. So my position is reflected in there. My position is a county outreach and special projects manager. And then the planning and development department is reflected as PND. And last slide, when I said Story County priorities to be addressed, that relates to our specific work programs and areas of emphasis as we look at next calendar year and subsequent years. And then changes that were discussed at the prior work session are reflected in the draft. They're in red and underlined language. There is one new tool that was added, and that's on page 20. This was based on the discussion of the previous work session. I'll do however the board likes me to do. I can actually go through. At the last work session, we went page by page and went through each tool. I can do that. The draft did, as I just said, reflect the changes with red language. But I'll leave it there with any questions or how receive some direction, how you would like me to go forward.
I'll let folks like me to go forward.
I guess I would ask what would be most helpful for the housing trust.
Yes.
They haven't had a chance to.
Yep. No, I asked them or have Brenda ask them.
So I don't know if you can hear the Housing Trust Forum board members, the discussion amongst the supervisors is that I think what they're doing is looking to us to decide, do you want to go goal by goal strategy? Do you want to, as there's things that you have questions on or want to voice, now's the time to provide some feedback and
Mike, Ms. Flores, so how do we do this? This is a discussion, once again, I think the Housing Trust should have had first before this joint meeting. Just so we could take a look at what our capacities would be, or what would that come down to. I support what's in this document. I did read it, like I said, 1 through 3. Those are my comments. I don't know how we, the Housing Trust Fund, are in this position right now, to sign off on anything that it says there when we haven't even talked about our own capacities internally.
This is Steve Ringley. I read it briefly too, and I'm broadly in sync with both the overall objectives and the details of the plan. I think we need a reality check in that the Housing Trust Fund has a fairly limited resource base of a few $100,000 per year that we can devote to solving a multiplicity of housing problems in Story County. And if we all understand that, then I don't think we have expectational problems about goals that appear to be overachieving. We are, of limited means, and we are focused on some solutions that keep people in housing primarily and prevent homelessness. And with that, I think that we can fit into an overall county strategy.
So one of the items that came up in one of the work sessions or public sessions as we were going through this potential plan was just that. I think the supervisors will attest to the fact that I brought up concerns that we are formed really for the purpose of taking those IFA dollars, but by no means we've had an eye on the future and how could we enhance what we do, whether it be private fundraising. What I would propose is there is a plan, and how could we enhance the partnership we have with the Board of Supervisors. With that said, there's been no decisions made, but that's really kind of why we're here today to say is there's an aggressive plan as it's presented. The funding we take from IFA and the relationship we have with Andrew's office in Des Moines isn't going to move the needle much on these initiatives. But is there a willingness and in an agreement that says our organization could be the right partner with some additional resources and some additional funding to support more staff time that could help move the needle on this plan? And so those were open discussions we had. And again, we want to have that discussion today with this group and with the supervisors. That's why we're meeting jointly, because we do know that it's one thing to have ideas on paper. It's quite another to say, okay, could we do this? So with that, I'd look to the three supervisors and that were here when we had that discussion.
And this is Andrew, I'll just say that, Loris, your capacity issue was also something that when my initial look at this, I shared that same thought process. As this is a lot. Some of it, there is overlap, but this is a lot of newer initiatives and just what the capacity for staffing would be on that. So I've started internal discussions at the MPO about that. That is why we have Todd Ashby, my director, and Dylan Mullinex, my assistant director, here to listen to these conversations, and so that we can continue our process internally at the MPO to figure out how we can continue to provide the staffing that's necessary for anything that the Housing Trust Fund Board decides they want to do. So that's the starting of our conversation today, and why we have Todd and Dylan on the call as well. And they feel free to jump in, Todd or Dylan, if you would like, but just know they're there listening.
And if I recall from our discussions before, I think where we listed like the housing trust, Fair County Housing Trust, wasn't necessarily to say this is a role that they will do. We just identified them as, gosh, this is a group we should be talking to. They'd know who are the other entities in the community that we should be kind of reaching out to. Was a starting point for our conversation. It wasn't or at least I didn't walk away with it saying, gosh, I've listed the Story County Trust Fund in all these areas that I'm gonna make them responsible for anything. That's not how I took it. I took it as it's a starting point for them to give us some guidance of where else should we be looking at. So with that, would it be easier? Would it be helpful to go through goal by goal? Probably. Okay, I'm getting that. So why don't we do that, Leanne?
Before we get to that part, it does say quarterly progress updates, and I was kind of unclear who gives the updates or what that part was about. That is before the table of action steps presents before. Quarterly progress updates will be presented.
Yeah,
Page
we're
six.
okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Page
my
6, yep.
Stuff isn't labeled here.
What Leanne, did you see it?
Let me see. So that, can't talk and share at the same time. Those quarterly progress, let me back up a little bit and go through the image then. And then I'll answer that question, hopefully is clarity to that. The way perceived implementation of these strategies is laid out is we're all partners, even though they're different sized bubbles. That's not just one person that can succeed in this on its own. But the Story County Economic Development Group is an entity that's been in existence for well over 30 years. They have representatives we have representatives from every community in Story County on that group. There is a direct tie between economic development and housing. They definitely go hand in hand. As we develop this, we looked to the Story County Economic Development Group to be really the wrangler, for lack of a better word, or even have a good descriptor other than they would be the ones that would be able to be the entity that helps continue to move it forward in addition to all the other parties. And those quarterly updates are, according to the bylaws of my position, not I, but my position according to the bylaws of Story County Economic Development Group, which are also adopted by the Board of Supervisors, have my position providing technical assistance to the Story County Economic Development Group. So you could reach a conclusion that my position in tangent and cooperation with all the other partners in this would be the one providing those quarterly updates. It's also easiest for me, my position, to do that since my position is the one that does all the minutes, all the agendas and all that. That's a very good question.
Thanks for clarification.
I will just, so quickly, can everyone on the screen see and the Zoom see the draft implementation? Someone could tell me yes or thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The time frames that are set up, there are 3 time frames. We have immediate short term, which is adoption to 3 years. And they really relate and build on each other. The medium, then they go up to 5 years, and then long term are within 10 years. And this plan, as written, from my standpoint, is intended to be flexible. I think housing situations, as we further said, move that needle will need to be revisited on an annual basis, maybe more regular basis. And these timeframes would be those that would be part of the evaluation too. It's set up organization-wise. The goals that are directly from the housing study, housing assessment, are in the dark blue on the left. Under each goal, then, are specific strategies from the housing action study. And under those strategies are tools. And as I said earlier, there could be some tools that are built in those strategies. So really, this first page, make it a little bit smaller so it fits on screen. These are the strategies that relate to goal 1, that's sharing the risk with the private market when appropriate. I didn't read it. I don't want to read the page of this. How would you want me are there any questions on each page?
So I would highly recommend that any of the board members, trust fund board members that are on the call today, to ask any and all questions that you have. This is a great opportunity that we have with the supervisors to make sure that when reviewing this document, we are all on the same page and all on the same understanding of what is being asked. So if there are any questions or any doubt that you may have as to what we're referring to, please speak up, because this is the exact right time to do so for that.
Leanne, do you want to explain a little bit, because I'm not sure if everybody understands where you've got like tool 1A-A or.
Yeah, that's where my mind was going. Okay. So then the organization, I said the strategies, under each strategy is a tool or tools. And you'll see the coloring scheme, yellow, orange, or green, relate back to that time frame. But the tool numbering, you see a tool 1-A, subsection A, I can't read from the screen. That tells you that tool is related to goal 1 and strategy 1A from the housing assessment. So you can cross-reference. I mentioned that Amelia and planning and development staff filled in this relates to column. That is the next column over. These are then the tools in addition to the one that you see that just what says or relates to it. They impact each other or drive each other or have an impact with each other. The resources responsibility required, that's exactly what it says. And really, who would be the driver of this or a key partner in this? And really, where are some responsibilities? In this first one, you would see county staff. And this first one talks about a contractual relationship with the Story County Housing Trust and the Des Moines MPO by default as the administrators for the Housing Trust. My position is listed there simply to be the one to be drafting the contracts and bringing all the technical aspects forward. And then the financial resources would take financial resources from Story County. And then the time frame is listed in each column. Does that make sense to everyone on the organizational aspect?
This
I
is
have-
Cheryl, and I understand that. I guess I do have, some of the same questions maybe that have already been expressed, but so if we're looking at tool A1 AC, what are we as the Housing Trust Fund committing to in that particular resource or responsibility? And are we committing today to something?
No decisions are being made today. Today is solely a work session to be able to really have these types of discussions today to really craft a path forward so that we can all achieve the great success we can. This one, for example, and there is some rationale to the order under the resources and responsibility required. If you see one where Story County Housing Trust is first, that would probably be a tool that Story County and other partners would look to the Housing Trust to manage that or help organize that, whatever the tool may be. In this case, this is a tool that would likely be driven by Story County, but we would need other resources. And so it might be the Economic Development Group. And so as such, my position is listed there under county staff. So in each of these, there's still some devil in the details that we don't know yet. This is just to get the thoughts down and start putting some orders out there to start working towards and really starting to flesh out program details. Maybe 8 months from now, we would look back and say, yeah, this type of tool would never work. But it would help us at least go towards that direction. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So Leanne, I'm going to bounce on Cheryl's question to be a little more specific. Administrative responsibilities. I mean, is that talking about being the fiscal agent? Is that, moving the money around? Would the Housing Trust be providing all the organizing clerical background? I'm going to call it clerical, but administrative assistance kind of stuff for the various entities involved. I mean, when I hear administrative responsibilities, boy, that's a pretty deep well. And I know you say the details are to be worked out, but that's what Cheryl's saying. What exactly are we being asked to even do? And even if we aren't being obligated today, where do those resources come from financially to go ahead and allow us to contract with somebody to perform those, like check writing and that type of thing, record keeping?
That's another great question. I'll see if I can, again, because the details are not there yet, Loris, but I think it's a fair question, but I'll look at a program, for example. There's a homes, let me find it. That will help. So it's a medium term, but this tool 1AK And this is really me trying to put a crystal ball on what this would look like in 3 to 5 years even. But say we're to the point where we've grown enough capacity in Story County that we're looking to other partnerships. And so we're looking at lenders through the Federal Home Loan Bank partnerships. Story County would not necessarily be in a position to enter those types of agreements, but the Housing Trust Fund would be a more appropriate entity to do that. That's the type of administrative responsibilities that the county and others would look to the Housing Trust to do, to accomplish to help meet the goals of the housing needs assessment.
Got it. So has there been any discussion so far, just in that particular example, about is their county obligated then in some of these to put out requests for proposals if the county's going to fund it? If you're going to give money to perform that type of function on a contract basis, what about RFPs? Or, I mean, there might be other entities out there who'd be interested.
Go ahead.
We have not had any of those discussions. I think that's a fair point though too.
Yeah, I would take it, Laura said, if it's above a certain threshold, we certainly would need to do that. Again, I, for myself, on this document, just looked at a starting point of saying, okay, this looks like something that the Housing Trust could do. It wasn't signing off and saying, yep, there's any decision there. It was like, gosh, you guys came first to mind on it. It kind of sounds a little bit from discussion of what kind of sounds to me today. It's best going through each of the goals and so that you can ask questions to Leanne too, and that we may need another work session. Future, well, I'm assuming we probably are, because we're not making any decisions here based on discussions today, what we're kind of finding out.
Okay.
Because I think you're right, there may be other entities that are not here, but I think some of us thought that you would probably know some of the other entities that we don't necessarily know all of.
Got it. Okay, thanks. I'll mute again.
Steve Ringley, is it fair to say that this task responsibility list is more of a aspirational and a courtesy to the Housing Trust Fund, that we clearly do not have the means or the skill set to engage robustly in every one of these, but this county is saying to us, if you have the ability and you have the network and the skills to contribute to one of these, to the extent you're able, you're invited into the process. Is that really what you're saying here?
Yes, I would say that, yes.
Okay, with that in mind, we clearly can't do everything. And so we should be prepared to say that we're going to have to very judiciously pick and choose what we can do. But we do appreciate being at the table to talk about each of these and select those which we can add the most value to.
So I guess my feedback on goal number 1 is, my concern is that $1,000 or targeting under $1,000 is not rent reasonable and it's not fair market for any 1 or 2 bedroom places in the county. So really you're only targeting then larger homes, which would exclude a lot of people. So you might want to tweak the wording to include like fair market value and rent reasonableness, because $1,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment in Nevada or Polo or any of those towns is not fair or what we're looking for here.
So for clarification, the blue and the gray was actually right from the housing study, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are not numbers those are right from the housing study, Hope. So
Okay,
those would
we
be
can
our,
edit those.
well, I mean, other than to debate them, and in some instances, when we've had the work sessions before, for things that were in the housing study, we went back and at the start of the document, kind of put some assumptions into place. And maybe that would, we talk a little bit about that in targeting the low to moderate income. I mean, kind of getting at that, because I had that same thing. I'm thinking, they're assuming that 250,000 is low to moderate, you know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and that's where when we jumped back up to kind of refresh, we went to the plan assumptions and really said, hey, here's really some things, and maybe that's where we put those disclaimers that certainly there isn't anything that would prohibit us, but other than from that is right from the housing study. Those, we haven't touched those words correct.
Right.
I mean, up until
Right.
this point in time, the blue and the gray is
Mhm.
pulled from that document.
Okay.
Brenda, you know a lot about formation of the housing trust, okay, with your experience. Let me ask you this. I thought we were under an obligation, or Andrew, okay, that in the housing trust is formed to deal with low and moderate income, where the housing plan, as just pointed out by Hope, is a much broader plan for the county. So do we have a disconnect there?
That's
You know.
that's a good question, Lawrence. I'd have to look at the formation documents. I mean, obviously by virtue of the IFA dollars, those would of course be restricted to those
Right.
target
Mhm.
areas. I don't know if specifically those documents put together, all those, it seems like a long time ago, specifically told us that we had to, or if we've,
Okay.
to date, that's only because those are the only dollars we've had to work with, but I couldn't answer that
Okay,
in
well, I
full.
appreciate it. It certainly goes to Steve about us being picking and choosing. We may have to pick and choose, even given this opportunity. Thanks.
So the tools on page 7 really do relate back, the first couple pages relate back to that first goal. Tool 1AB is working with major employers, with really employer assisted housing programs. Tool 1AC is looking at partnerships with other jurisdictions and nonprofits to look at how we share the installation of infrastructure to help reduce the cost of housing. Okay, I'll go on to page 8. We still have immediate short-term tools under this first goal on this page. Tool 1AD is considering a demonstration project or pilot project with the development-oriented local landowners that really is just what it says, the best practices model. And that's really a lot, if you look at the right-hand side, the responsibilities and resources, that's where a lot of the partners are in play in that one. The next one is inventorying public-owned lands to see those are underused or could be reused for housing. The next one, tool 1AF, is developing a community speculative home program. These would be shovel-ready sites, infill sites within communities where affordable housing solutions could be located. And then the last tool on the site is 1AG, and this is partnering and looking for placements for homes for Iowa houses. Any questions on this page? Going on, we're still within goal 1 and still that first strategy. Tool 1AH is looking at identifying clustered infill opportunities, really to maximize the opportunity that infill sites provide. And then that's the last, the immediate short term. The remainder on this goal on this page are for the medium term. And tool 1AI is the Lending Consortium. That would include partners, including but not limited to the Story County Housing Corporation and Able of Iowa. Tool 1AJ is looking at the benefit of the Housing Trust becoming a charter or a community housing development organization. And then 1AK is looking at partnerships, as I said earlier, with the Federal Home Loan Bank and other local lenders.
Andrew, have you looked at what the process is to become a certified community housing development organization? Is this an easy process? Is it a full-time job for 5 years?
So I have briefly looked at it.
Okay.
I do not know the full process. It's obscure is the wrong word, but unknown entity across most of Iowa. So I don't have the specifics on it. There are some benefits to it. I know there are some funding benefits that go along with it, but also with that comes some additional restrictions that I wasn't super clear on reading the documentation on whether it applied to us or not. So there was a lot more information I needed before I could say one way or another if it's better or worse than our current setup. But there are some merits to it. I just don't know the drawbacks quite yet. And Leanne, I did have a quick question on the Lending Consortium. What would be the target for that? Like who would be taking advantage of Lending Consortium? Are you talking about developers, builders, any and all above?
Any and all above. Again, the demo, the detail.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I had a good on that.
Good question. Any other questions on this page? Now we're on to goal 2. This is creating a supply of affordable lots, and then there are 2 subsections to that. Several strategies under this goal. The first one is special assessments. The first tool is tool AA, creating a special assessment guide / toolkit for communities and developers and builders. This is medium term. Then we go into the second strategy, and this community involvement and financing infrastructure. So tool 2BA is reviewing and considering developing a revolving infrastructure loan program. Again, medium term. And then there's our first long-term one, which is 2BB, and this is speculative financing revolving loan fund for contractors, specifically in this case. Any questions on this page?
Well, this is Loris, and for the 2AA, the first one here, the Special Assessment Guide Toolkit, in the past, that has been something that I've always associated that the person contractor with the AADC would do for the supervisors. So, but maybe I've misunderstood what this special assessment guide and toolkit would be. I'm looking at special assessment as very specific related to taxation. Am I being too narrowly focused?
I think you need to look at it from a broader lens. That's definitely a key component of it. But again, knowing this is 5 years out, possibly a lot could happen in those 5 years. And the key is, if I had all jurisdictions, that special assessments may look different in Collins as opposed to Gilbert or
Okay.
Story County too. So it's not, the way I'm envisioning this, it's not a one-size-fits-all assessment guide either, toolkit.
Okay. Okay, thanks. But I am in the right way as opposed to it being a very general, like assessment book, meaning a whole checklist of different types of items. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this page? Next page, we go to goal 3. And this is when we are switching to growing the number of rental units for all age groups and increasing the supply of quality rental options and providing rental options beyond traditional apartments, looking at different types of housing. One of several strategies is the first one is 3A, looking at leveraging risk sharing tools with product requirements. There are several tools under this one. The first one is the only immediate short-term one though. That is tool Tool 3AA, and this is creating and acting on new policies that talk about incentives and financing mechanisms for that missing product type, or that target missing product types. Then tool 3AB is really looking at nonprofit organizations to purchase. I'm trying to not read it, because I'm not doing a very good job. Evaluate potential to provide funding for nonprofit organizations to buy income restricted units proposed to be converted to market rate housing. Tool 3AC is providing funding for special needs residents for housing opportunities. And 3AD is opportunities for senior housing investments and developments that are affordable. And then 3BA is under a new strategy that is evaluating potential downtown space that can be reused for housing, existing commercial buildings. And that's immediate. Any questions on this page? Next one. You'll see some changes from the last work session, those that were in attendance. On 3BB, looking at identifying partnerships to develop a resource guide. We added the identifying partnerships really to say how key that is. That's necessary to form those relationships, and we can't just develop a resource guide without those. Next, 3BC is looking at evaluating zoning requirements, potential reuse and adaptation of spaces. And then strategy 3C, we have one tool under that, and that's really looking at how we can support accessory dwelling units, granting flats, however those are however we refer to those, but evaluating zoning requirements that either allow those or prohibit those types of uses if appropriate, deemed appropriate by jurisdictions. Then under strategy 3D, the next few on this page are all immediate short term. 3DA is looking at partnerships with our employers for workforce housing solutions. 3EA is identifying properties that are really underdeveloped and seeing why they're underdeveloped and helping identify some strategies that will help those to be developed essentially. And then 3E is reviewing potential and considering establishing incentives for small scale types of development. Any questions on this page? First by time set things. The next page, we continue with goal 3. The first three tools under strategy 3E address really how the example site plans and the process to really pre-locate or pre-approve, which is not the right word I want, but have drawings, have conceptual plans that could more easily go through a process. They're all 3 medium, and I'm not going. First one is talking about community-specific design guidelines manual. The second gets to property acquisition and management policies for public sector and private entities, and then lastly the example site plans and products. And then the last tool on this page is 3EF, and this is actually building on 3EB, and this is what encouraging public-private partnerships for the acquisition or purchase of properties that then can be redeveloped for affordable housing and housing solutions. Any questions on this page? Continue on then. I believe this might be the last page for goal 3. Last three tools on this page for goal 3. The first 2 are immediate short term. The first one, we did not have the right word for formerly incarcerated individuals, so that is the correction under 3FA, but addressing that population and housing needs. in our communities. 3FB is providing displaced resident or displaced tenants with relocation assistance. And then 3FC is looking at appropriate tenant protections to improving household stability, what those strategies may look like. Actually, since the last work session, this is where you now see the human service providers added in as responsibility. Any questions on this page?
I have a comment for the short-term goal, tool 3FA. That's actually a HUD goal, and so the COC, the continuum of care for the balance of state, that's one of their goals that they're working on. So that would be a great connection because it's kind of a statewide initiative to really lower those barriers. And then with adding human service providers in, that just worries me a little bit, not because of anything except for the human service provider working shortage. I worry about adding more responsibilities into people who are already overwhelmed and short-staffed. Not that you have a solution or anything to that, but adding even one responsibility to someone who's already working 60 hours a week could be that one tipping point. That's my only comments, but yeah, definitely the state could help on that one.
So speaking to some of the questions we had earlier from the board, trust fund board, how will you be addressing human service providers? Will you going to them directly? Will you be having like a meeting to kind of get their input on specific, I mean, the sections that pertain to them especially, but just the document overall?
Brenda, can you help me how our discussions on that one? Well, partly through the asset process. too,
Okay.
And how the board's priorities are to the asset funding process and creating needs assessment. Those have identified. Even our own community services, that would be accounting staff. But we just saw some of these tools. The county really did not have, the county and others really could not, we had a role, but we couldn't be a major player to change that needle in any direction. That we relied on others who would have to do this all work together. Human service providers would be that direct contact with where the most needs are.
I think also, Leanne, from our conversation with our colleague, is there may be some human service providers that are already doing this work. So it wasn't necessarily recreating the wheel or adding to them. It was just identifying that, gosh, there are probably some human service providers that are doing this work already. And so who do we need to reach out to, and not having the list of, when we had those conversations and say, oh, this person does this, this, and this. We just kind of said human services providers. If that helps explain.
I think that's an important part of the next steps too. When this is the position or the point that we are adopting or wherever we are in the process, how we broaden the scale of those reviewing this and discussing the implications. It's about too.
Thank you.
Anything else on this page? Page 15, goal 4, now fostering grassroots efforts. Just because I need the 1 and 2 under that, I'm going to read that for everyone's benefits. Don't rely entirely on outside developers who need to build at large scales for profit margins, and find ways to partner local builders with local investors who have means and passion for the communities to undertake land development. So being a planner, when I hear grassroots efforts, that whole has a whole new different meaning for me unless I read 1 and 2 along with that. There are a few strategies under this one. Under strategy 4A, there are 3 tools. Tool 4AA is looking at building on, it says encourage the development of neighborhood housing advocates. We already really have that. It's just formalizing it, or maybe informalizing it, just encouraging those discussions to be occurring. As I say, they're formally or informally, but in a way that the ideas that are being thrown out those tables are sometimes some of the most innovative and potentially implementable ideas that someone said, well, this is a silly idea. Well, it's a silly idea that will mean something to someone else. So having those discussions, but encouraging that type of discussion. 4AB is partnerships with organizations that provide identifying and developing partnerships for within organizations that look at everything from low-income workforce but senior housing. 4AC is a medium time frame, and this is a ongoing partnership with local trade schools to look at renovation, retrofitting of housing that already exists, or maybe even going beyond that, but keeping the partnerships going with local trade schools. And then under strategy 4B, it sounds really similar to what we've talked about in the past, but really developing prepackaged site plans and RFPs. As I said, what can get through a development review process and get on the ground quickly. And if it's stick built, get family inside there, a rental unit to individuals with the housing they need. Any questions on this page? Going on to the next page, we're still under goal 4. Another long-term one is kind of looking at prepackaged site plans and RFPs, but looking at the lending experience, lending end of things, rather than the approval process. And so obviously that builds on the first one, the approval process, and then the lending process. Under strategy 4 is looking at roundtable discussions with workforce development, workforce sponsors, talk about strategies that will be impactful in our housing needs throughout Story County. And then tool 4DA is developing a comprehensive funding strategy that will guide identifying current resources for affordable housing that address current and potential sources of funding, how funds should be spent. So really, what's out there? What can make it? Where are the funds available? Where should we be going after funds? Where can they have the most impact? How can we leverage funding and that whole catch-all? Anything on this page?
This is Loris. I think that possibly under 4DA, the comprehensive funding strategy and guide, that actually this is a place where the housing trust might have interest in participating on this. From, that I think the board should talk about it more, but that it may be somewhere that would be a natural add for us and require fewer resources than some of these other items. I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Loris.
Okay, on to the next page. We're now at goal 5. And this is proactively preserving the current existing housing stock. So these strategies and tools really do outline implementation path that looks at what our current housing stock has to offer. And if it's in less than ideal condition, how we can address that successfully. First 2 get at code enforcement. Tool 5AA is just evaluating what level of code enforcement is happening throughout Story County. And again, I may be a broken record here, but when I say throughout Story County, I don't say, I purposely am not including inside city limits, everything except for within the city. And so that is an immediate short term. And then the second one of that is specific to Story County, but it's undertaking feasibility study to look at a building code for unincorporated development within Story County. That's a medium term. Under strategy 5B, there are several tools. The remaining on this page, the first three, first one gets at marketing. Let's identify what programs are there and make a concerted effort to market them effectively and both financially and to reach the populations that need to get the messages. Then look at continue to provide funding for rehab programs for rental and owner-occupied structures. And then the last one is marketing existing energy efficiency and emergency programs that are throughout Story County. And targeting some first-time home buyers and senior residents in those efforts specifically. On this page. Hearing none, continue on goal 5. The first one looks at really kind of housekeeping, the database of what programs are there, and just having a way to go to that database and know what the resources are available to share with individuals who may ask. The next one is developing, looking at reviewing the potential and then if feasible, establishing a home buyer assistance fund for the loan program for entry level. And this one does have some income thresholds specifically tied to this one. Tool 5BF is looking at establishing a program looking at mobile home manufactured home communities throughout Story County. And then the last one is home buyer education financial literacy programs. And these are all immediate short-term tools.
So the first one already exists. It's called the Story County Resource Guide, and it's maintained by United Way of Story County. And then I think Micah helps keep it updated as well.
So I'll check with them. Do you know, and maybe this is a side conversation, I can go with that, but I know the county itself has some programs too. From the housing standpoint too. And not so much like our home-based Iowa program. That's what this is getting at too, so.
Yeah, so the Story County Resource Guide has everything, whether it's food pantries, every housing program, like early school development resources, and it's all in one guide that we can give to any participants. It's 19 pages, I believe.
Okay, perfect. So we'll look at and maybe reference that in here as well. Or that may just necessitate as a result of more than just Toolkit. Any other comments on this page? Okay, going on to the next page. Page 19. We're now on goal 6, maintaining fair zoning. Maintain fair zoning and regulations. Addressing projects objectively and logically, not easy for me to say, and updating regulations for current policies and needs. Several strategies under this, 4 strategies with the tools underneath them. First strategy, the first 2 are immediate short term. One is developing a database of all for existing ordinances throughout all our communities, from subdivision, zoning regulations, codes that have been adopted, just so we have an idea of apples to apples comparisons, especially when developers are trying to maybe cluster sites within and across communities too. So that would be the type of assistance Story County would provide that type of data. Next one is developing a plan for adapting vacant commercial space into housing. And the last one is looking at how we've addressed affordable housing with Story County's comprehensive plan, which is called the C2C plan, or cornerstone of capture. Any questions on this one? Okay, the last page.
That's it all.
Page 20, we're still under goal 6. The first tool there, tool 60A, is looking at some, again, the already established administrative site plan approval processes that would allow housing to get through the process in a quicker fashion to get it up and going faster, addressing comprehensive goals and targeted housing needs. Next strategy, 6C, the tool actually, it's kind of odd how the correlation worded, but it's reducing parking requirements and other really, I think we might be broad in this, but specifically looking at parking requirements and see if there's anything in that as an element of building code that's really increasing cost of housing. And as a result, an unintended consequence of regulations is basically what this is trying to get at too. Strategy 60 has then 3 tools under that. The first one is an online dashboard to look at the capacities from an infrastructure standpoint of jurisdictions to really accommodate more housing within their communities. The state did this years ago. Brenda, do you remember when the state did quit doing this, like 10, 15 years ago?
Even that dashboard thing,
Right?
that dashboard thing.
Yeah.
Longer than that even, yeah.
There's some with our online geographic information systems. There's a real, we have some real good capabilities to do this and do it well that would help the communities. Next is, and that's short term. The next 2 are both medium term, evaluating really just the setback and lot sizes, the maximum and minimum density, seeing what may need to be changed to help address housing and maybe provide some additional incentives for housing that we will take there. And the last one is really determining when incentives are needed to maximize returns on investments. That's a new one that was discussed in the previous work session, just been added. Any questions on this page?
Any questions?
So if I might make a suggestion to specifically the trust fund board members, part of our challenge, I think, is the housing study was started pre-pandemic, wrapped up during pandemic, got rolled out in a pandemic. Our board meetings were virtual, the supervisors were virtual. Not only is the navy and gray, those are for sure items you can find within the narrative of the RDG report. The tools, a number of them, Leanne, and even we didn't pull those out of the sky. A lot of those are referenced as well in the study, but not nearly as defined under strategies and goals like they are in this document. So I think it would do us all well to go in and reread the housing study. It's 117 pages or something. It's really a pretty quick read, but it also includes some really good case studies. That can be found on the Story County website. And so this document is really a tandem action plan to that document that I think the overall intent was we don't want this to sit on a shelf like so many studies do. And to think, a lot of the stuff really was in that report, but it got rolled out at a time where none of us were meeting in person. And I think, again, had I had to do this all over again ahead of today, I'd say start by reading that again first, because the trust fund is mentioned in there. Those partnerships are identified in that document as important. And so as you're talking with others or thinking about our conversation today, I think it's well worth your time to to go back to the original study. And then that's really kind of how you can see it means something to all of our communities is there's plans and action plans and what we need for units. And I think this is a piece to help when the day is done. I guess that would be my closing comments to the Housing Trust Fund board members.
Taking any comments from them or?
Do you guys have it? We've got a few minutes before we close the meeting at 3:30. Any parting thoughts from the group? And I think Lisa said it best is that I think we need to convene a work session again and have further discussions, but.
And we'll work together to figure out a time to have a meeting with just the trust fund board to have some discussions amongst
Perfect,
ourselves.
yep.
In the early part of January before our regularly scheduled meeting so that we can just kind of debrief, I think, from everything we've heard today.
That's a good point.
And have some really good discussion, just the Housing Trust Fund.
So Brenda, the outcome for us as the Housing Trust Fund Board is there's no action item today with respect to this plan, but we have agreed to engage and discuss it further in January.
Yeah, I think it really is an opportunity. If we, it would seem as if it would align with our countywide group. So again, these are suggestions and tools and it's a draft and I think in our debrief, we can identify those aspects of the program we think align with our mission. I'll make sure I pull the bylaws too as well. Back to your original question, Morris, on can we be involved in stuff that doesn't target the low to moderate income income of things? So we'll make sure we're consistent with our bylaws. But yeah, I think I like your idea of the debrief and then we can Latifa sits on our board and we can carry those ideas forward. So
And also at our debrief, I think it's important to note, just like Brenda said, that this is a draft and we can also, as a group, make suggestions on any changes or suggestions or anything that our board wants to do. So I just want, this is a draft, nothing is set in stone. So there's a lot of discussion to be had on our end, especially about how we fit into this Story County puzzle.
and maybe it's a further clarification of our role and responsibility a little bit back where we're in a column doesn't mean we have to be the implementers of that strategy, but we could play a role in communication and maybe that would be helpful to the board too, is to say, do we have to drive that? No, maybe we just have to be a vehicle to supporting that initiative through communication but it doesn't have to be that we're the driver for that project. I think maybe that would be helpful too.
I think for us as well, it's rereading the building percent in conjunction with this, but also helps identify just through our discussions today and just what we've seen, who else might we identify as potential sources or partners or whatever. We just kind of put something down initially to help with those conversations. But maybe that is just something else. When we meet again, we can say, well, gosh, we've identified this, or through our conversations here that were brought up today. Oh, we didn't consider that. We need to be looking at that as well.
Let me remember where we are with the economic development group.
Sorry.
Let me remember where we are with Story County Economic Development Group.
So that's actually part of the next steps. Next steps I just shared that I had identified for me that I wanted to present today. There are revisions that, there are some items that will necessarily be tweaked and removed or whatever added to, but then also prioritization by the Board of Supervisors as we look at fiscal year 23 needs too and calendar year 22 needs. But the Economic Development Group meeting in January, I intend to put this on the agenda to bring them up to speed too and have them work through this too. might start taping myself doing this whole presentation.
Do we have a date for that meeting?
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head. I know-
January 27th.
Thank you. I know they were approved at the last, the calendar was approved at the last meeting of the economic development group. And then, I mentioned this a couple times, we, at some point, need to start integrating that EAMS 2040 plan, but we are dependent on EAMS and their process on that too, and that's just, I don't want to lose sight of that, and I don't think we will, but I feel a responsibility to continue to know that too, because that's a big, that donut hole is key with us too.
Because I had, obviously old notes, but I thought they were gonna, it was a joint meeting today at all. But I missed it.
I think they were invited to participate. They had the date if they wanted to.
Okay. Do you have a time for the 27th?
Like 10 a.m. this
Yeah,
morning.
okay.
I don't know.
Put that
Usually
down.
10 a.m. Usually 10 a.m.
Thanks, Greg.
And I don't know if Amber's on the line yet, but the city council tonight will actually be have the hearing regarding the adoption of the new 2040 plan. So that process officially is done. It's on their site, but tonight's kind of a key step.
I just want to say that I think that Leanne and Brenda have done a great job of organizing everything that was possibly recommended in the housing study. But that also means it's a very daunting job. I mean, I've been looking at it as we go through thinking, oh my God, we hired a couple people and gave them 10 years where they get all this done. I mean, honestly, we've got to prioritize, we've got to tease out what are some first steps, what are some doable things that are successes we can build on, because it's great that we don't lose something this way. It's an amazing effort. It's really good, but it could sink us unless we say, let's find some way to get into it and dig into it and do something that really would make some difference that we have the capacity to do and we're not just calling ourselves doing. Said very eloquently, but that's just my feeling right now. We need to figure out what's the most important thing to do that we can feasibly do. And I don't know what that is. I have a sense it's probably not big building things that require a lot of pre-approved plans and a lot of, gotta be smaller. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments, or Leanne, did you have anything more? Okay.
Thank you guys so
Yes,
much
thank
for
you.
making housing a priority in our county. I think that's wonderful, just the growth we've had for the last decade that I've been around of late. We're talking about housing. We want everybody to be housed. And I think that's really exciting that we all are seeing this as a human right instead of a luxury. So thank you guys so much.
The first step. And yeah. If we get further along, we'll be. People's lives, that will be when. No, go ahead. No.
There's nothing else we could, do you have anything else?
No, thank you for this opportunity. I think this has been very productive and I appreciate the opportunity.
Nothing else we could move to adjourn?
We have a move to adjourn from the trust fund.
Second.
I have Hope and Greg.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm still alive.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Say aye.
Aye.
And the question.